This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Digital Law News. This is a webinar and podcast brought to you by Digital Law and produced by Anson Evaluate. So just for those who don't know, Digital Law is a small law firm based in Barnsley that focuses on things to do with digital and technology matters such as data protection, international data transfers, and so on. So I'm joined today with my colleague, Peter Wright. So I'll just pass over to Peter just to introduce himself.
Yep, thanks, Laura. My name is Peter Wright. I'm the Managing Director of Digital Law, and the purpose of these weekly discussions is to just give you a flavour of the sorts of conversations we're having in the office when we're looking at the news stories that appear in both the specialist and national press every week. So just to give you a bit of an analysis on those from a law and tech perspective.
Great. So we'll get straight into it then. So the first one we'll be looking at today, a lot of you might have heard about this or even been affected by it in the last couple of weeks. So Outlook down, Microsoft email service, Office 365 and Teams suffered mass outage. So recently, I think it was probably last week, Microsoft's Outlook email service went down and SharePoint and OneDrive weren't working properly. So this investigation carried out by Microsoft actually determined that the fault was primarily in India. However, it did affect users globally as well. So out of the people who were reporting issues with Office 365, 60% of those were affected by Outlook issues, and over a quarter of those were struggling to connect to servers. And for those who were having trouble with Microsoft Teams, nearly half of those were experiencing issues connecting to servers and actually logging into their teams as well. And this has been the second of such outages for the software giant firm in recent times.
Thanks, Laura. I think this story is fascinating because, you know, we do a lot of work with clients who say, yes, we are developing a system, and, you know, when we say, well, where are the servers located, they'll say, oh, it's, you know, we're using Microsoft systems, so we're either using Microsoft Dynamics or Office 365. Or sometimes they'll be saying, look, we use AWS or another big cloud provider. And I think the lesson in this story is that just because you might be using services in the cloud, and just because it might be a massive service with a massive brand that everyone knows, doesn't necessarily mean it will operate for 365 days of the year, 24 hours a day. And this typifies the fact that those systems sometimes can't be relied on. So A, think about making sure you've got a backup, and B, make sure that backup isn't with the same provider. Because Laura, you and I have sometimes worked on some privacy impact assessments with some of our clients where when we've asked that question, they've gone, oh yeah, well, we use, you know, Amazon's cloud and the backup is also in Amazon's cloud. And of course, something like this happens, what are you going to do about your backup? But I think the other thing for this is just because there's been such a massive move to having data stored in the cloud anyway over the last 10 years, before we look at the even greater moves this year when everyone suddenly thought, oh, good grief, we need to allow everyone to work remotely from home. One of the best ways of doing that is to have info in the cloud. This means it has an even bigger impact, and we're not talking here about just corporations that might use Office 365. This has implications for local government, even academia. I think your university is affected by this as well, isn't it, Laura?
Yeah, so I didn't notice myself, obviously, because I've not started my portfolio yet, but at BBP, the university I go to, we use OneDrive for different things. So obviously that would, if I did upload my work, I would have lost it. So I think the main point, like you said, Peter, is just to make sure we do have a backup of everything, because if I lost all my work, I mean, I wouldn't be best pleased.
Exactly. It just brings home the fact that I think sometimes when you start talking about backups, people tend to sort of glaze over and think, oh, this is another tick box, something we have to have that we'll never use. Well, believe me, when you suddenly get to the point where you want to need that backup, it will appear to be the best investment you've ever made.
Yeah, definitely. So moving on to our next story. This one's about cryptocurrencies. So the cryptocurrency watchdog has now banned type of investment described as being akin to gambling. So financial products based on the price of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are being banned from sale to retail consumers by City Watchdog. So the FCA said that consumers were at risk of sudden and unexpected losses from the investments and the ban would save those investors a whopping £53 million a year. So this ban is going to apply from 6th of January and applies to trading in derivatives. Sorry, I can't say that. And effectively bans bets on cryptocurrency prices rather than the assets themselves.
Yeah, thanks for that, Laura. Yeah, so the interesting thing here is that it's one of the ways that the markets work, of course, is to allow traders to make bets on which direction the currency is going to go, up or down. So famously, you know, bets were laid that sterling would fall after the 2016 referendum. Sure enough, it did, and some people made an awful lot of money as a result. Now, this is taking that a stage further, and there are products out there that allow people to bet on the performance of a cryptocurrency, like, for example, Bitcoin, but there are, of course, many other cryptocurrencies out there. And the FCA here is saying there can be sudden and unexpected losses, and indeed there could be other factors that actually influence the price of a cryptocurrency, because a cryptocurrency, of course, operates and is influenced by different factors compared to traditional currency, you know, real world money with national banks, banknotes, coins, etc. And the thing here is that the FCA, the UK Financial Conduct Authority, is turning around and saying we are not going to allow for these products to be marketed to consumers. Often at the moment, I think they're marketed through, you know, click here when you're reading through on a news site, for example. You might suddenly see, you know, click here to make huge amounts of money, and look at this great way to make money without really doing anything, that's sweeping the nation and all this sort of stuff. You click on it, it induces you to then potentially buy these products, which then end up losing you money rather than earning you money. And that is leading to this not insignificant loss of £53 million a year. So that the FCA is turning around and saying, look, this isn't, we aren't going to allow these products. I think it is also reflective of the fact that the cryptocurrency market itself is not subject to the sort of regulation that a traditional currency is subjected to. We haven't got time on this podcast to go into the detail on things like the OneCoin phenomenon, which is another cryptocurrency that people buy huge amounts of it, but then you find that you can't actually trade it because there is no underlying blockchain to it. And that has been subject to investigation and warning notices from the UK Metropolitan Police. Now, this is different. This is looking at products based on those cryptocurrencies, but it highlights the fact that an awful lot of these cryptocurrencies, you know, they aren't like the dollar or the pound or the euro, and they can be influenced by other things. It's not necessarily fair. It can be very confusing. It is certainly not transparent. And that's why the FCA is turning around and making this good, clear step. I think this is actually an example of the UK financial regulator here making a good step that I think will be followed by regulators all around the world, more than likely.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that what you said about the OneCoin thing, a lot of people did lose money through that. And like you said, it's the, I think, did you say it was the police who actually, or something to do with that, who actually put a notice on their page, but then because that got removed, people now think it's okay to use it again when it's really not.
That's exactly right. So yes, the Metropolitan Police took down that notice. It had been up there for a few years, and then the promoters behind OneCoin then said, oh, look, the Metropolitan Police have taken down their warning notice. Look, it's perfectly safe. It's perfectly fine, despite the fact that the FBI have arrested the chap who was leading OneCoin, and the original founder of OneCoin, Dr. Ruja, is now missing and has been for a period of several years. But she did go missing just before it looked like the FBI were about to catch up with her. For more information, if anyone's interested and wants to know more about OneCoin, I can highly recommend Jamie Bartlett's BBC podcast called The Missing Crypto Queen. So if you're really interested in knowing more about OneCoin and the potential fraud that's taking place there, then I can highly recommend that podcast for a deep dive into the world of cryptocurrency.
Great. So moving on to our next one. So we did touch on this last week about employee surveillance, but probably in a different aspect. So people are now saying employers are doing surveillance on them to do with the COVID, but this was before that. So H&M have been fined €35.3 million. Sorry, I missed the M out there. For illegal surveillance on several hundred employees. So the company has been keeping excessive records on the employees' families, religions, and illness of its workforce in Germany. So they've actually been fined by the German data protection watchdog. So the H&M have been found to be carried out extensive staff surveys with details of holidays, medical symptoms, and diagnosis of illnesses. And managers have also been having informal chats with the employees about family issues, religious beliefs, and then they've been actually storing that data and using it to then evaluate work performance and make employment decisions. So I think it's just worth mentioning as well that this is the second largest fine of a single company as faced under GDPR. Obviously, if we're not taking into consideration the Marriott and BA, which should be actually finally coming to a decision about that soon.
Indeed. So yes, Marriott and BA, they are under appeal. So while they are on the face of it much higher fines than this, in the region of hundreds of millions of pounds, they are not confirmed yet. So that's why this is like the second largest single fine as yet. And I think this is fascinating, as you say, Laura, the fact that we were talking about surveillance last week. I think the key thing here is in the second paragraph where you've written there the fact that the company was keeping, in speech marks, excessive records. And as we know, a key principle of GDPR is data minimization. You only collect the data that you need. And arguably here we've got this excessive collection, not just information in relation to the employee, but the employee's families, and then other ancillary information that seems to be far more excessive than it needs to be, and that's why the German data protection regulators act as they have. Let's not forget that Germany has always had a very stricter interpretation on data protection than other EU countries, and their version of GDPR, where they have enacted a version of GDPR using the recitals and derogations to really make it as tight as possible. They've therefore shown teeth with regards to their enforcement here to really make an example of H&M. So, and I think this is interesting when you've got, it's a wide range of different data here, stuff from staff surveys. It seems to be data collection on a scale that simply is unwarranted, really over-egging the pudding, as it were. And hence that's why they are clamping down. And it's a big message actually for employers to think about, look, when you've got a distributed workforce, when you've got either your whole workforce working from home, or even when you've got the hybrid of them working, a day or two in the office and then other days at home, do not think that that is therefore a reason to then engage in excessive data collection in order to keep tabs on the staff. Everything in terms of, physical amount of hours in front of a machine, how many emails they've sent, how long on phone calls, all this sort of stuff. You might think you need that for performance monitoring, but think very, very carefully about, is this effective performance monitoring, or is it actually going into the realms of being excessive? If you're going to therefore collect a KPI, I'd say make sure it's more fundamental as to the actual job that someone is being asked to do, as opposed to going down the realms of potentially being excessive.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it'd be interesting to see if anything else comes from this as well, because H&M have taken full responsibility for it and are saying that they are going to compensate their employees for it, because they do realise that obviously it's not something they should have done. But yeah, making employment decisions based on the information they shouldn't have had as well is a bit wrong, let's say.
And that could be an expensive mistake, because it's in addition to that £35 million fine, we can see the information here is about hundreds of different members of staff, and they could be looking at therefore making payments of multiple thousands of euros per member of staff. So it's sort of compounding the financial pressure that H&M is under there. I think that would be a blow in any year. This year, when we're looking at potentially having had the greater costs of operating during the lockdown, and the effect on sales, that means this isn't well timed for them. Having said that, an awful lot of clothing retailers have actually better years in some respects, because if they've been able to do a lot of their sales online, they've benefited from people having a more sort of captive amount of people buying from home. But they'll have had enough disruption this year that I don't think, you know, a 35 million euro fine is never going to be well timed, but it's particularly poor time to have fallen on them this year.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just important to say that, like, it just shows that people are not just given a break this year just because of what's going on in the world.
Exactly. I think it's really important that you get regulators like this continuing with their enforcement, and it just shows, just because it's a global pandemic doesn't mean that enforcement stops. It's not an excuse to sort of take the laws and regulations that are in place and ignore them in pursuit of just being able to survive.
Yeah. So moving on to our next story. So this is about Cambridge Analytica and the ICO's investigation into what happened back when it was the Brexit campaign, and in Russia as well. So the ICO have now closed their 3-year investigation into Cambridge Analytica, concluding that the controversial data company did not directly misuse data to influence the Brexit referendum. So Elizabeth Denham has also said that her team found no evidence of Cambridge Analytica aiding the Russian intervention in the UK political process. However, she warned that the company's data protection practices were very lax, with little thought for effective security measures, and its activities raised broader concerns about the influence of technology in politics in general.
Yes, thanks, Laura. I mean, this is absolutely fascinating, because anyone who's sat and watched the Netflix documentary The Great Hack, which spends 2 hours telling you about widespread Russian fraud and misinformation and the role of Cambridge Analytica in that, and how it could have affected both the EU referendum and potentially it also affected the US presidential election. The interesting thing here is that this is saying, look, despite all of the rumor and innuendo and investigations and people, the fact that Cambridge Analytica's offices were inspected by the ICO, who went in there wearing navy blue coats like the FBI and walking out with all these servers and equipment, after an exhaustive 3-year examination of all that equipment, all of that data, exhaustive interviews with all of the staff involved. Not to mention, there have also been inquiries in the UK Parliament, in the House of Commons, and also investigations by the Metropolitan Police and law enforcement. This report from the ICO represents the final nail in the coffin with regards to all of those allegations, showing that the law was not actually broken. That's not to say that Cambridge Analytica weren't doing some rather lax activities and some rather sharp practices. It seems that perhaps the way that they were acquiring data and some of the ways that they were using that data, they were a business Cambridge Analytica's business was to basically go to anyone running an election campaign and say, hi, we can help influence that through a mixture of messaging, branding, communication, and in theory, a sort of element of data targeting. It shows that what they were doing wasn't breaking the law, but it wasn't particularly savoury either, is the point. But did it break data protection law? No, it did not. It is interesting that Cambridge Analytica is no more. You know, that raid that took place was arguably the end of that organisation. It lost its credibility very, very rapidly. But this is showing that, yeah, they were doing many things. Did they break the law? No, they didn't. It'll be interesting to read that report in full to actually see the analysis and the conclusions that are reached. But as someone who's actually gone through the minutes of the hearings that took place in Parliament and various other forums, as well as those that took place in the United States, actually seeing this report, it fits in with the fact that there was never any evidence. There was an awful lot of smoke, but not actually any fire when it came to these allegations. And now, in the fullness of time, that's becoming very, very clear.
Yeah, when this first came out, there was a lot of people writing about it in different articles and things like that, but they could never find the evidence, and I'm sure this just shows it, doesn't it, that it wasn't what everyone expected, basically.
It does, and actually it just flags up as well that I think, you know, Netflix and Amazon are doing great work having documentaries on their channels and showing people something apart from, you know, drama and movies. Bear in mind that there are very different rules and laws around what a streamer like Netflix and Amazon can put in a documentary and say this is fact, compared to the laws that apply to the BBC or ITV or Sky in the UK, or in the same way the traditional broadcast networks in the US, Europe, and around the world. Because, you know, they're making these films and saying, oh, you know, look, you know, this is trying to almost confusing their opinion and the views of journalists with fact. And I think it's an important thing to bear in mind when these streaming platforms are so popular and you get so many people watching them, just to think, just have that element in the back of your mind. Ask yourself, what are they basing the assertions that they are discussing here on? You know, are we actually seeing documentary evidence, screenshots of emails, documents, proof? Or is it just a succession of talking heads telling you what their view is? And I think we need to get increasingly wise to this. We've talked in the past about fake news on social media and fake news out there, and I think it's almost to a certain extent we have to think about our news sources even when we are watching what purports to be a authoritative documentary on subject.
Yeah, I completely agree. So just moving on to our last story then. So this is regarding the SRA and their trail back of firms flouting price transparency rules. So back in 2018, it became law that regulated firms have to be required to publish cost information for conveyancing, immigration, employment and road traffic offensive works, as well as employment, licensing and debt recovery up to the value of £100,000 offered to businesses. So they have to publish this information on their website in a prominent place. And this information includes the basis for the charges, including hourly rates, fixed fees, and the experience and qualifications of anyone carrying out that work as well. So basically, the SRA have announced that they are going to be doing these spot checks on websites again, making sure that all the companies who do need to publish this information, so the regulated firms in those areas of law, are publishing this on their website, and there will be actions against those who are not publishing it as well.
Yes, thanks, Laura. I mean, this is typifying the fact we're talking about the ICO and the FCA and that German regulator, and it's clear that they are continuing to work, they are continuing to enforce, and the SRA is doing the same thing here. Price transparency has been required since 2018. It was something that when the UK competition regulator, the Competition and Markets Authority, looked at the legal profession a couple of years ago, they said there needed to be this element of price transparency. So that's why the SRA is so keen on it. And they're making it clear here, you have to have this information on websites. And I've seen, you know, that a few publications are saying, look, is this information something that consumers really are looking at? Is it actually helping consumers when they're making the choice of which lawyers to go to? Arguably, no, it's not making an awful lot of difference. I think very often they've said that more often than not, it's actually other law firms taking a look at the prices offered by law firms. So it's being used to actually carry out a little bit of market intelligence on your competition. But regardless of the actual, you know, practical effect of this publication, the regulator is still saying, look, you've got to have it on there. We want you to make sure it's on there. If you've not got it, we're going to want to take a look. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be war and peace, the information that's up there. And I speak to a lot of lawyers who go, look, how can you possibly have an accurate price for a piece of conveyancing when you don't know the direction the transaction may take? It could get more involved. There could be this, there could be that. It might, and they get very anxious about saying, well, how can we possibly make it clear what this price is? But all it means is just at the end of the day, put it in and say, look, this is a cost that excludes various possibilities. I mean, an immigration matter could be straightforward. It could take months and months or years and years. So it is very, very difficult to give fixed prices for things. You're very much sort of giving an estimate and saying this is subject to different variables, but it's just to make sure you have something on your website that is an indicator in terms of if you're providing services in these areas, you're then saying this is what the anticipated fees would be. And as long as it's there, you're okay. If you've not got anything on there, or you can't find easily on your website, that's where you're going to have a problem. So as always with a regulator, it comes down to demonstrating compliance.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to mention as well that the SRA have said they're doing just random spot checks on firms' websites. So sometimes people think, oh, they won't find out because I'm not being investigated. And I think it's important just to remember that they are doing these random spot checks, so you could be caught out at any moment. So it's best to do this as soon as possible if you haven't already got it on your website.
Exactly, and it's an important point just to make it clear that, yeah, make sure it's on there just in case they happen to come calling.
Yeah, definitely. So that's everything for our stories today. So we just wanted to give a little reminder that we have a special offer on our GDPR manual for legal practices at the moment. So this originally came on sale in 2018 when GDPR came into force for £195, and it is now down to £99, so around 50% off. So this comes in hard copy and digital copy as well, just for an extra £5 for postage and packaging if you wanted that hard copy. So I'll just pass it over to you, Peter, just to explain a little bit about it.
Yeah, thank you. It contains a load of forms and templates and checklists to give you a practical handle on approaching your compliance with GDPR, giving you a view in terms of best practice. It talks about areas of good practice. It also talks about things you shouldn't do. Sort of teachable moments and things are in there. And it takes what I think is sometimes a fairly complex piece of legislation and tries to put it in clear, plain English, what it's asking you to do and what you need to do in order to demonstrate that compliance for the regulator. So as always, hope for the best, plan for the worst, make sure you've got mechanisms in place to demonstrate you're complying with GDPR, and this manual allows you to do so. I should also add as well, it's for legal practices, but also we've had some people from other professions, so accounting and other professions have said, yeah, we've actually found that manual really helpful as well. So if you're interested in getting a handle on that, then please just drop us a line.
Great, thank you. So that's it for today. So thank you once again for listening. Just a reminder as well that we do this live usually on a Tuesday at 4 p.m. And also it is available on demand on our website, YouTube channel, and through podcast places, so Apple App Store and on Spotify as well. So thank you again for listening, and see you next week.